Ready?
You look great.
Rock and roll. Hi, my name is Pat Kaplan, and I have the pleasure of interviewing today Susan Wolfson, and today is December 17th, 2004. I'm conducting this interview as part of the Connecticut Bar Foundation James W. Cooper Fellows Oral History of Connecticut Women in the Legal Profession project. This project is sponsored by the Connecticut Bar Foundation. So, Susan, this is a real pleasure for me to do this.
And for me, Pat.
Would you start by telling us something about your background?
Well, I was born on May 2nd, 1938 in Brooklyn, New York. My father was a civil engineer. He had graduated from Cornell in 1927 and was very proud of that. My mother had never gone to college and was very sorry about that. She worked as a legal stenographer for many years, and I think that probably was the inception of my interest in the law. She talked about it all the time. My brother's also a civil engineer, and we have no immediate members of our family who are lawyers, except for my cousin Nick Wolfson, and I'll mention his influence later.
So would you tell me a little bit about your experiences growing up, some role models you had in your life?
Well, I think what I like to think of as my main role model was my mother, who is a very strong personality. But I tell this story, and people seem to really enjoy it, about a certain type of experience that she had, which I think started my interest not only in the law, but also in gender bias and gender equity. When my mother was a legal stenographer and an interpreter, actually she interpreted Yiddish, in the U.S. District Attorney's Office in Brooklyn or in New York in the 1920s and early 1930s, all the women, of course, all the legal secretaries were women, of course, and all the lawyers were men. That was the time, actually, of Tom Dewey and many other very well-known lawyers who later became judges and politicians. In any event, the lawyers had a habit, as they leaned over the secretaries to look at their work, of putting their hands on the secretaries' shoulders and looking at the work. The secretaries, of course, were not happy about this, but they had no recourse. In those days, there were no laws that would help them in any way, shape, or form. My mother came home and told her 3 older brothers about this situation, and she just didn't know what to do about it. My eldest uncle, my Uncle Morris, said, and I quote, "The solution is simple," he said. "You get some straight pins and stick them in your shoulder pads, sticking up, and that will solve your problem." Well, as you know, in those days, everybody wore big shoulder pads, so that was easy. My mother went back to work, told her friends, they did it, and that type of harassment stopped. You know, somebody would put a hand on a shoulder and the secretary would say, "Oh, I'm so sorry," but meanwhile, the hand would be scratched. So I like to think, my mother talked about that all the time, and I like to think that that really was one of the real beginnings of my interest in the law and gender equity and in doing something about it.
So would you now tell us something about your college years?
I went to Barnard College and I graduated in 1959. It turned out to be one of the best experiences that I've ever had. And it has confirmed the experience that I had at Barnard, really confirmed a lot of my belief that women's colleges are important, are necessary, and are valuable to women. There was just no question about worrying about speaking in front of men or speaking instead of men or expressing opinions. It was just all there, and I think all of us benefited from that experience. So I really appreciated that. I was the managing editor of the Barnard Bulletin, which was a newspaper, the Barnard newspaper, and I did a lot of other things. I did Greek games, and I did many other extracurricular activities. You'll remember Greek games.
Yes, I do.
I did many other extracurricular activities and won a Bear-Pin Award for being active. I did not choose to study law while I was in college.
What did you study?
Economics. It seemed to be the area in which I was most interested. I also, like everybody else I knew, by the time I graduated from college, I was engaged to be married. And my husband at that point was at Columbia. We met in our freshman year. And he was going to medical school. One of us had to go to work. And that, of course, was going to be me.
So what did you do when you graduated from college?
When I graduated from college, I worked for Union Carbide, Celanese Corporation after that, and Sperry and Hutchison doing economic research. These were all in New York while my husband was at medical school. And I liked the jobs very much, but he was then offered a fellowship in Boston, and there was just no question that we would go. So we did. I gave up my job, and then also was pregnant with my first child. And so I stopped working at that point.
So could you describe, if you would, the next, I think it's 15 years, of
Mhm.
what you were doing in your work and your family?
Well, I had my first child. Actually, we still lived in New York, but it was just before we moved to Boston. Then when we got to Boston, I worked part-time at a management consulting firm, which is called Harbridge House. The interesting thing is I would have liked to go to business school, but in those days, Harvard Business School was not accepting women. In addition, I was terrified. I was just too afraid to even try to apply. As a result, I worked at Harbridge House, which was connected actually with the business school, and I wrote a manual on import-export procedures for AID. Liked it very much. I then had my second child while we were in Boston. We subsequently moved to Texas, where my husband was in the Air Force after his training was completed, and for those couple of years I was not employed. Those are the only 2 years of my life during which I was not employed. Then after that we came to New Haven, where my husband was employed at Yale Medical School.
And then at what point did you apply to law school?
When I was 35 in 1974, I was casting around for something to do with the rest of my life. I had worked part-time at one of the Yale Economic Growth Center projects, but that was not going to get me anywhere, and there was nowhere else that I could see myself going in New Haven. And one day in, I guess it was February, maybe even March, in 1974, my cousin Nick Wolfson, who was then a professor at the UConn Law School, said, almost offhand, he said, you know, with your talents and your abilities and your aptitudes, you ought to go to law school. And all of a sudden, I thought, gee, you know, that makes sense. And within 2 weeks, I took the LSATs. In fact, I had a herniated disc at that point, and they set up a special table for me. They were very kind about that. Took the LSATs and applied to UConn. I was sure nobody would accept me at that point. But when I was accepted at UConn, I then had some sort of a decision about whether I would wait a year and apply to Yale. I didn't have the courage to do that. And so I enrolled in UConn in the fall of, actually it was the fall of 74.
And what did
No,
your,
I'm sorry, it was the fall of 73.
what did your family, your parents, your spouse, what do they think about you going to law school?
Well, actually, my parents were very supportive. My mother, who lived in New York, would sometimes take an early 6 o'clock train from New York in order to come and take care of my children if I needed help. My father also was very supportive. My husband was terrific. My husband, who had always worked around the clock, arranged his schedule so that he could be home to take care of the children in the mornings. He drove the carpool in the mornings, took care of them on weekends, took care of the children on weekends so that I could study. And he understood very greatly and also was very appreciative of the fact that I had worked while he was in medical school. But the community was not so supportive.
Did you have experiences about that you can tell us about?
My son was just about to start kindergarten. when I started law school. And the principal of the school to which he was then going told me that I would ruin his life if I went to law school, that this would destroy his life. And that was very difficult to overcome when this person told me that, because I respected her, I valued her opinion, and I always worried about it. My son doesn't feel like I ruined his life, my daughter doesn't, but it was tough. There was a lot of guilt, I felt a lot of guilt. And in fact, during the time that I was at UConn, which the campus then was in West Hartford, each time the children needed any care or sick at school, we would instruct the school to call my husband rather than me because I was so far away. And they didn't do it. They would try me at home for hours. And then they would say, we tried you all day. And we would say, my husband and I would say, but we've told you that I'm not in New Haven. A very good experience that I had with UConn, and it was my first, and I still appreciate it, was that given all the guilt that I was experiencing, when I first was accepted, the letter that I received indicated that I would be assigned to a study group, or to a group which moved together in terms of classes and studies and things like that. And each group had a different slot in terms of the day. Some were early in the morning, some were later in the afternoon. So I communicated with, and I remember his name, Peter Lane, who was then there. I don't remember what his title was. And I indicated that that I really needed an early slot so that I could be home as much as possible in the afternoons. And I was sure I was going to get a response saying, never darken our doors again. But I didn't. He responded positively, and I had an early schedule. Those were the days when it was dark until 8 o'clock in the morning, and I remember my early trips were done completely in the dark.
How many women were in your law school class?
Well, my class was the first class. I graduated in 1976. The first class that had more than a smattering of women. And one of the experiences that I liked the most about it was that there were several of us, quote, older women who had children. And we had a lot in common, and it was wonderful to meet them and to work with them. Some of the marriages didn't make it through law school, however. It's a tough thing to go through.
What was the reaction of your male classmates?
That was positive. They were quite supportive and helpful in law school, and I see them now once in a while as I move around, the state, and they're all very friendly and very helpful. There was no problem there at all.
Did you have any mentors at law school that you can remember?
I remember Shirley Bisuits, who was the librarian. Now, she was, as I remember, the only woman faculty member. And although she was a lawyer, the only job that she really could get was to be a librarian. She did teach sex-based discrimination. I still remember that course. But she was very nice and helpful to the women in the class. She would have us to her home for dinners, and she would be very supportive. She was great. My cousin Nick Wolfson, again, was always very helpful. I would stay at his house sometimes when the weather was terrible. Although there were times when I drove home on the ice because I knew I had to get home because my children's babysitter had to get home. But in any event, Nick and Shirley probably would be the most helpful.
Did you work part-time law visits while you were in law school?
I worked the summer after my first year of law school. I worked for Dick Jacobs, who's a lawyer in New Haven, who's also a very good friend. The next summer, I worked for Sachs, Delaney, and Sachs, I think, believe it or not, which was another law firm in New Haven, and which did more commercial work, which I was interested in learning about. During my third year of law school, I took a legislative clinic and worked for Senator Joe Lieberman, who was then, I think, the Senate Majority Leader of the Connecticut Senate, and spent a lot of time in the legislature. I really enjoyed that.
And when and where did you take the bar exam when you graduated?
I took it in New Haven at Southern Connecticut. I still remember there were little round lights in the ceilings ceiling, and they started to flicker at one point. And I still remember feeling that I didn't know if I was the one who was flickering or the lights were flickering. But I did take it there, and I did pass it.
What opportunities were available to you for employment when you graduated?
Well, those were limited. They were very limited. I remember I interviewed with a lot of firms who were interested in my background, but I was asked questions by some of them that were really offensive. Like one representative asked me who would make dinner if I had to work late. And when I responded with the question, how many employees do you have in your law firm, he said, I'll withdraw the question. But he didn't offer me the job. Another partner in a law firm in New Haven said, well, we would be interested in you especially because you wouldn't care whether you were made a partner or not since your husband's a doctor. So they were limited. It turned out I went to work basically for Senator Lieberman's law firm because I had worked for him and he was happy with my work.
What kinds of work did you do?
I did anything that came in the door. Basically, in those days, Senator Lieberman was busy with the state politics. Ted Baldwin was another person in the firm, and he was busy with city politics. The third partner was Jim Segaloff, who did all the legal work. And so I basically did the work that he assigned to me. A lot of collection work, a lot of real estate. Some family, not very many to start with.
Were you the only woman in the firm at that time?
Yes, I always have been. Well, no, I'm sorry. I haven't always been the only woman in the firm, but I was for a number of years.
And did the male attorneys include you in their kind of work that they did and socially?
Well, one of the nice things that happened was that Jim Segaloff knew some of the older male lawyers in the city of New Haven through his family connections. And he used to have lunch. There was a table at the Paragon restaurant on Chapel Street in New Haven. And there was a large table in the center of the restaurant, which would be reserved for lawyers. And all these elderly, most of them were elderly, lawyers would come and sit at that table. And Jim would go all the time, and he took me along. And it was interesting that these older male lawyers were so accommodating and welcoming to me, because not only was I a woman lawyer, to them I wasn't so old, but I certainly was older than a beginning lawyer. And they were terrific. There were times when if I needed forms to do some sorts of work, they would provide them for me. They would walk us through. At one point we got some new foreclosures and we didn't really know how to do them. And one of the lawyers, Morris Melnick, I remember, gave us all his forms and walked us through foreclosures. There was one time when I had to attach an interest in an estate, and Ed Cohen had all the forms for that. And he beckoned me to his office, and he went through his files, and he got out all his forms, and he said, now you do this, you do that, you do the next thing. And I did, and it was quite successful.
Was this lunch at the Paragon, was that something, were you included in that lunch? Were you invited?
I was. They were all very happy when I went. They would answer my questions very fully and completely. Some of it had to do with the fact, I think, that they were impressed that my husband was a doctor. I can't say no. But they were very helpful. Also, when we talk nowadays about ethical issues in the law, these guys didn't need to learn about ethics. They just knew what they had to do and what was right, and they did it.
What were you paid, if you remember?
I remember I earned, when I first got out of law school, which was very low at the time, even then, I earned $10,000 a year.
And do you think that was similar to what your male classmates were earning?
No, I think they earned more. In fact, I'm sure.
How long did you stay at the law firm?
Well, I've been at that law firm or a derivative thereof ever since. I started out by being their associate, their one associate, 3 partners and 1 associate, and then about 5 years later I became a partner, and it became Lieberman, Segaloff, and Wolfson for a number of years, and then in 1989 we merged. Joe Lieberman went on to bigger and better things, and Jim Segaloff and I merged with Sussman and Duffy, and that became Sussman, Duffy, and Segaloff.
And
And I've been there ever since.
Do you think that your opportunities for advancement at the firm were unusual for a woman at that time?
Yes. There were two women partners there at that time, one of whom went on to become a judge, and another is still there. But there were, for a long time, there were certainly no more women partners, and even very few women associates. Now there are a couple of women associates there.
Were there any advantages or disadvantages to your being a woman at that firm?
Not sure. I'm not sure. I think everybody was always very careful. All my male partners were very conscious and very careful about what parameters were laid out for lawyers. I don't think that I was actively discriminated against in any way, shape, or form. It is true that when the firms merged, ordinarily my name would have been on the firm, but at that point I thought that I was going on the bench, and so I didn't push for that.
Do you think that your being a woman affected the kind of practice that you had?
Yes, absolutely.
In what way?
As the years went on, I became more and more involved in family law, which it turned out I grew to love, so I was quite happy about it. But it was the kind of thing that when I started out, I took whatever came in the door for me. And what came in the door were family matters. And I learned a lot about them. I ended up working in the American Bar Association Family Law section on various committees and things. So I was happy to do it, but I think there's no question that the fact that I was a woman brought more family cases to me.
What was the attitude of attorneys outside your firm towards you?
For the most part, I thought they were fine. I remember an elderly probate judge named Tom Keyes, who also practiced law in New Haven, who was opposite me on my first trial. And unfortunately, I can't remember the subject of the trial. It was not a family trial, but I won, lo and behold. And he was wonderful. He called me to congratulate me. Every time I met him in the years after that, he would say, "She's the one who beat me. She's the one who beat me." It was really kind. I think for the most part, most of the male lawyers were fine. I did have a couple of experiences, though, one with an elderly judge just not all that many years ago, when I was reporting to him about a case that I'd settled. It was also not a family case, but it was scheduled to start a trial before him, and my opposing counsel was in Hartford. And we settled the case that morning, but it took lots of phone calls and lots of time, as this will happen. And this other lawyer didn't prefer to come down to New Haven if he didn't have to. So I called over and told the judge's secretary that we would be late. And finally, when we settled it, I went over to court on my own to report. And I walked into the judge's chambers, and I said, "Your Honor, we've settled this case," and I began to talk about the case. And he said, "You're late." I said, "I know I'm late, but my opposing counsel is in Hartford, and I was trying to accommodate him by not making him come down, and we've been negotiating all morning, and we settled this case. Isn't that wonderful?" And the judge said to me, and I quote, "I ought to spank you," he said. He said, "You know, it's a long time since I spanked a little girl." And this was not that many years ago. And I thought to myself, as I realized what he had said, here I am, an elderly person. It was so terrible. I am sure that judge will not remember that he said it, and I'm also sure that he would still not realize what was wrong with saying it if somebody reminded him. So I got that kind of thing. I've had other types of things with judges and lawyers too, but there have been times when judges or lawyers have called me by my first name and then referred to other lawyers as attorney so-and-so. And there was one young lawyer who I kind of invited out to the corridor, and I said, "You know, you have to stop this." And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "You got to stop calling me by my first name. I don't know you. We're on trial together." And he didn't understand. He did stop, but he didn't understand why.
Susan, was there a time when you thought of applying for a judgeship?
Yes.
Can you describe what happened?
Well, I applied to the Judicial Selection Commission 3 times. And I was turned down all 3 times. The first time I was assured that by members of the commission that it would be fine and I would go right through. And then I got a call the next day saying that I had been rejected. And of course, when I asked why, Paul McQuillan was then the director, the chair, I think. He just said, well, we can't tell you that. Then, I guess because I'm stubborn and I bang my head against brick walls all the time, I tried again. And I was told by members of the Judicial Selection Commission that the problem had been the first time that I didn't have enough experience, although I had done many, mostly family trials, but many trials. And this time it would be better because I'd had so much more experience. Well, got turned down again. Then I tried again a couple of years later. I think you have to wait a number of years. I can't remember how many years. And once again, I was told that I was rejected. Wasn't told why this time, but there was just some sort of really steely, strong opposition. I have to say that I know several women who I know to be completely and supremely qualified who have been turned down. I know a couple of men who've been turned down. I don't know many. I can't say that it's only women, but I do know that there are certain women, and many of us share certain qualifications and certain backgrounds and certain ethnic areas, and I really can't help but wonder whether there's something to that. And I think it's a shame because, first of all, they talk about not being able to get family judges, and they don't pass people who have family experience. But in addition, I know these women to be so qualified, and I think they would make fine judges, and they're not being given that opportunity.
Did you meet somebody who was on the committee at one point?
I did. One day when I was at court, I met somebody who'd been on one of the commissions that had turned me down. And I was told that person apologized to me and said that I had been treated unfairly, I had been treated poorly, and that if that person had known at the time that this happened, what that person knew later, that person would have taken some stronger steps to make sure it didn't happen. But of course, I still don't know what happened.
And Susan, when you applied for the judgeships, you had been involved in a lot of bar activities. Could you tell us about your bar?
Yes, I've always done a lot of extracurricular activities. Extracurricular being extra legal. I was president of I moved up the ladder in the New Haven County Bar and was president of that in 1982, I think, president of the New Haven County Bar. I then went on to be active in the Connecticut Bar Association, and I was active in the Council of Bar Presidents, and I became an officer in the Connecticut Bar Association, and moved up there until I was president of the Connecticut Bar Association in 91 to 92. And in the course of being so active in the Connecticut Bar Association, I was on the Chief Justice's commissions on gender equity, on racial equity, on judicial ethics, on professionalism. There were an infinite number of committees on which I served. I then became a member of the board of directors of the Connecticut Bar Foundation, which I still am involved in and like very much, and a fellow of the Connecticut Bar Foundation. In addition, after the Connecticut Bar Association, I moved on to the American Bar Association, where I joined the family law section, and I became chair of the Alimony and Spousal Support Committee and the Congressional Relations Committee, and also I served on the council for about 4 or 5 years of that group. I also was on a couple of standing committees of the American Bar Association, the Standing Committee on Professionalism and on Ethics. those were very interesting as well.
How do you think your bar activities affected your career?
I'm not sure. It's a very interesting question. I do not think that they really brought in any new business. What I do think is that as I worked within the court system with other lawyers, that my activities were very helpful. People knew who I was. People recognized my name. I met all kinds of people within the Connecticut Bar Association and the American Bar Association and the New Haven County Bar Association, so that if I needed any help or any resources, I always knew where I could call, and that was very helpful. I mean, one situation was the librarian in Bridgeport. It's a relatively small example, but it was kind of nice. The librarian in Bridgeport once opened the door to me after the library was closed to make a copy because he recognized me. He said, "Aren't you president of the Connecticut Bar Association?" And that's kind of just an example. But I knew lawyers all over the state, and it was very helpful. And there was one case that I had that involved international child abduction, and there is one real expert who practices in New Jersey on that area, and I was able to pull her in, and she educated the judge, she educated opposing counsel, she educated the counsel for the child, and she educated me. It was wonderful, and I would never have known about her had I not been active in the ABA.
Were there any historical events that affected your career?
Well, I think the entire development of gender equity and women's issues certainly affected my career. I think it made a lot of things a lot more possible for me and for other women. What I do worry about is that I see younger women not recognizing that the battle is not done, that there's still things that have to be done. It is true now that young women can go to court and say, my babysitter was late, so that's why I'm late. And that is an excuse now that will be accepted, or cancel a trial or postpone a trial if a child is sick. In my day, in our day, yours and mine, we had to pretend we didn't have children. There was a time that I had been up all night with my son because he had croup, and I ended up going home. We were at Yale, New Haven all night with him in their croup room. I ended up at 5 o'clock in the morning going home, taking a shower, and going to the office and doing a trial. And at the end of the day, I was seeing spots. And my opposing counsel, who was a very tough lawyer, when I later, and who had been very awful in the trial, when I told him later what had happened, he said, he said, if you had been a man, you would have asked for a postponement. But you didn't have the courage, did you? And I said, no. And this was 1978, something like that, 1979. So we never, ever did that. We pretended that there were no issues, no problems at home. We could be there at all hours of the day and night, and we would do our job. So I think that has gotten better, no question.
We haven't talked much about your family, and I don't want to leave that out, so that's a very important part of your life. So tell us a little bit about your family. You mentioned your husband was a doctor. Tell us about your children.
Yes, my husband's a cardiologist in New Haven. I have 2 children, one of whom, a daughter and a son. My daughter is a graduate student at the University of Colorado in theater studies, which she just loves. She has done all kinds of interesting things, although never involved in the law. Although she's taking one seminar now, colloquial, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce it. Anyway, a seminar involving the use of evidence in different areas of life, including the law, theater, medicine, and all kinds of other general areas. And as part of the course, she had to go out and buy a copy of the Federal Rules of Evidence. And I kind of smiled at the thought of her reading that from beginning to end. But she's very interested in that aspect of it. My son, on the other hand, did go to law school, went to the University of Pennsylvania Law School, and graduated. Never practiced law. No, he did one summer. Two summers, I'm sorry. The 2 summers that he was in law school, he did practice. Subsequent to that, he went and he worked in the U.S. Senate for 7 years, which really was interesting. He worked for John Kerry and for Paul Wellstone, and loved the work. But now he has taken another career change, and he is in Los Angeles, where he's writing for television and films. So this is a whole new area for him. One of the things that his law school education helped him with, however, was that he did write a couple of scripts for Law and Order. So he used that experience.
Would you say there was an impact on your career, on your family?
Yes, absolutely. I remember, as I mentioned, the principal who had talked to me, but my son at some point during my 3 years had to write a paper or whatever they were writing in those days those years on his hero, and he wrote a paper saying that his hero was his mother, because his mother had a dream, had a desire to go to law school, and against all odds and difficulties, did go and graduated. So that was really nice. Other than that, it is true that I was very busy and I worked very hard. I like to think that my children learned from that and gleaned experience from that. They're certainly, both of them are very independent. And their relationship with their father really flourished, which was very helpful.
In looking back on your career, why did you want to be a lawyer?
Well, it was really interesting. I have to say that when I went to law school, when I went to college, I never even thought of going to law school. And even after that, when I was working in business, I never thought of going to law school. It suddenly seemed, when my cousin suggested it and when I looked into it, that this was an area that I could really love, that I could learn and I could love and I could make use of. And it turned out to be so. And it turned out to be a very wise decision.
So it met your expectations?
Law school, yeah. The second year of law school was tough. The first year was so exciting. The second year was tougher because it wasn't as exciting and the end was not in sight. The third year the end was in sight. So law school was a mixture, but practicing law has certainly met my expectations, yes.
And what are the rewards or advantages to your career, do you think?
The rewards to me or to you? Well, I've learned a great deal. Intellectually, I've been stimulated all these years. I found all kinds of outlets for my talents, not only in the practice of law, which was very significant because even while I was so active in bar activities, I still kept the full law practice going. That's what I mean in some ways about pretending you don't have children. I just did everything I had to do. My partners were very surprised that I was able to keep up my caseload while being as active as I was. And I believe that intellectually the stimulation was just terrific. It was just marvelous. And I also have liked the people that I've met and the people that I've grown to know, which is a whole world for me.
What advice would you give to a woman entering the legal profession today?
A couple things. One of which is, as I said earlier, don't think the battle is won, because it's not.
And what do you mean by that?
Well, I believe that young women are at a real disadvantage. What I'm seeing even now, I've seen it all through my career, and I'm seeing even now, that young women graduate from law school, and they go to work, and then subsequently they want to work part-time because they have families. And the law firms, I really believe, for the most part, do not do them justice. And what I'm seeing is that more and more women lawyers leave the law firms with which they've been associated to go into practice on their own or with other women because they want different things out of life now. Now, it's fine for them to want these different things out of life, but I think there should be a way for them to get this within the firms. We had our Gender Equity Committee at the Bar Association had a prize. We named it Sue Wise, the Sue Wise Gender Equity Award in memory of Sue Wise, which recognized law firms which were taking steps to a gender equity, part-time partners, or women advancing women partners. And it was not always easy to find law firms which were recognizable in this area. So I really think that they've got to just recognize it and work together with it. I also see, and I think you may see the same in your bar activities, that women are just too busy and too involved with their family responsibilities to become active in extracurricular things, and as a result, they are not doing them, and I think that that's a shame.
What was the impact of your career as a lawyer on your life as a whole?
Well, it shaped my life for almost 30 years. It really did. It was very important to me, and probably I was certainly devoted, and I believe I spent good quality time with my family. But there was no question that my law career shaped my life in terms of hours, in terms of time, in terms of friends, in terms of social direction, in terms of issues. The issues with which I became involved certainly were defining. And I also must say, which I didn't say before, my son, I'm proud to say, was the only male member of the Capitol Hill Women's Political Caucus when he was in Washington. There's a photograph of all these women and him. And he was very active. He did committee work. He really did good work. It wasn't just like he loaned his name to it. So.
How do you view the role of lawyers in society today?
Well, I think this is kind of hackneyed. I mean, we hear it all the time. But I think we are definitely taking a downturn. Part of it is because we have too many lawyers. There are just too many lawyers. And there are too many lawyers who are looking for cases, who will take cases that shouldn't be taken, that cases that should be turned down or minimized in some way, shape, or form. I think the lawyers who steal money are giving us all a terrible, terrible name. And that's certainly a relatively new situation. I think I mentioned to you the other day the fact that we used to be able to take a lawyer's trustee check, and it was as good as a bank check. I mean, we would go to closings, and we would take a trustee check without even thinking. Nowadays, we can't do that. The banks don't let us, partially because so many trustee checks bounce. They bounce, or other problems arise, and we can't do that anymore. And that's a terrible kind of thing to be able to do. I've had lawyers say to me, "But you know me, it's my trustee check." And I do know them, and ordinarily I would believe in them, but given the circumstances, you can't do it. So I think that that's a shame.
What, if anything, do you believe women attorneys have added to the legal profession?
Well, I think that we've added a whole dimension, women attorneys and women judges, unquestionably. We've added a whole dimension of humanity. By that I don't mean that men are not humane, but I really think that women have a different slant on things, and it's an important slant for everybody, for litigants who come before judges and for clients who come to lawyers. I think it's important that we have that area that is not ignored. So I think women lawyers have certainly we've done a lot for gender equity, even though I know there's more to be done. We've done a great deal in terms of educating the public, educating lawyers, educating the judiciary on gender equity. and on other types of equity as well.
What accomplishments in your life are you proudest of?
Oh dear. Well, I am very proud of having gone to law school. I graduated at age 38 with honors. I really am proud of that. I'm very proud of my bar activities. I was the third consecutive woman president of the Connecticut Bar Association, and one thing that happened is, as you know, the presidency moves around the state, and when it was New Haven's turn and I was up for it, I was taken out to lunch by a couple of old pals, and it was suggested that I drop out for 4 years, and that I would still be a young woman in 4 years, so that I could be president in 4 years. Because how could we have 3 consecutive women president? And the first one was Marilyn Seichter, who was the first woman president, then Carolyn Kelly, and then me. But I did not take that invitation, and I was president at that time. So I'm very proud of that, and I'm proud of the work that we did. I'm proud of the work that I did as president. There's a wonderful program called Law Works for People, which is run by the Connecticut Bar Association, which Judge Frank DeAndrea and I put together. And that was not only was it fun, but it was just so valuable and so helpful, and it continues to this day. So there are some other programs too. The gender equity stuff was something I put into effect then. I was the second woman president of the New Haven County Bar. The first one was Rhoda Loeb, and she actually was a fine mentor for me. She pulled me up right behind her. She had been president when I was first out of law school, and she named me to the executive committee, and then she made sure I became an officer, and all of a sudden there I was, and nobody really noticed me till I got to be vice president, and then I became president.
You've also won a couple of major awards, which you haven't mentioned.
Oh, that's true. I won the Pro Bono Award from the Connecticut Bar Association, and I won
The Charles Parker.
The Charles Parker, thank you. Pro Bono Award, which I shared with Judge DeAndrea, and I won the professional accomplishment. I can't
The
remember.
Shields Award.
The Shields, John Eldridge Shields Professional Award from the Connecticut Bar Association, and I won an award from this statewide. Oh, I didn't mention that. I've been very active and very supportive, and I'm very proud of my work supporting legal services for the poor. I was president of statewide legal services for a couple of years, and one of the incorporators, in fact. And I won an award from statewide legal services, Connecticut Legal Services, for that. So I'm very proud of those things. And just recently, I won an award from QUELF, Connecticut Women's Education and Legal Fund, for my work on behalf of women and children.
Thank you, Susan. This has been a pleasure for all of us.